Two. Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Book Talk Radio Club. My name is Claire Perkins, and today I'm talking to author Jeanine Kitchel. Jeanine's debut novel, Wheels Up, a novel of drugs, cartels, and survival, was published in 2018. Jeanine spent 15 years on Mexico's Caribbean coast where she bought land, built a house, and opened a bookstore. Beginning first with writing travel articles for Mexican newspapers and websites, she later branched into fiction. Hello, Jeanine. Welcome back to Book Talk Radio Club.
Thank you for the interview, Claire. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Jeanine, can you tell us why you started writing fiction?
Sure. Well, after I moved to Mexico, as you mentioned, in the late 90s, I started to write travel articles when a publisher walked into the store and asked if I could do articles for his blog. So as I came from a journalistic background, it was very easy for me to do travel articles and to do cultural stories about the Maya. But as a former journalist, it just was not a difficult thing to do. And of course, with the Yucatan Peninsula where we lived south of Cancun in a little fishing village called Puerto Morelos. We were surrounded by pyramid sites, and it was just a great jumping off spot to be able to write about. But as I had the bookstore for more years, and as the years went on, I did notice that there was beginning to be a lot happening with like corruption and eventually some escalating violence. And so I decided that I could reach a wider audience if I wrote fiction and fictionalize some of the elements that I was noticing that were taking place and still take on the important issues that were happening. And that was the beginning of my fiction writing with Wheels Up.
Tell us about the novel. When did you come up with the idea to write the book?
Well, living in Mexico and having a business there, I just realized that there are too many untold stories that needed to be told. And being a business owner, everyone told me many different stories. Some seemed unbelievable. And I more or less I guess I felt maybe how an artist might feel, that I had like this empty palette in front of me. And since I had written nonfiction, I started to think, well, these would be wonderful stories to tell. So the fishing village, as mentioned, being so close to the pyramids and all, it just seemed like I could wind all these stories together. And then with the creepy dominance of the cartels, I thought I could use that as a prompt to write about a fictionalized protagonist, Latina. And I thought I'd put a woman in the driver's seat and use her what happened to her, because in the book she soars to the top of Mexico's most powerful cartel when her drug lord uncle is captured. So that was the way that I decided to enter into the world of fiction.
So tell me about Wheels Up. Give me a brief idea of the story.
The story is that Leila Navarro is the niece of a fictionalized drug lord, and he's captured a second time and incarcerated. And when that happens, her older brother, who was next in line, was killed in an ambush, and her other brother isn't up to the task. So the job falls to Layla, not unlike in The Godfather, where Michael Corleone is the next in line. Family is the primary basis for, especially for the cartels in Mexico. It's usually cousins, brothers, sons, fathers, and those are the people that they can trust. So that was the basis.
Your non-fiction writing led you to write about the Mexico cartels after owning a business there. What was it like to own a bookstore in Mexico?
Owning a bookstore and a business in Mexico was a very, very different process. First of all, you have to deal with an accountant, and owning a business there, I actually had to get an attorney too to make sure I was doing everything properly. But because I did have the bookstore, as I mentioned, so many people would traipse through, like on the cultural part, the Maya side, archaeologists, explorers, local travel guides, and travelers. So I learned quite a bit, and I became privy to a lot of information that the normal person, like an expat or a tourist, would ever hear. Plus, we were one out of 6 bookstores only in the entire state, and our entire state included the city of Cancun. So in a way, it was kind of like living inside a telenovela, and those telenovelas are like the soap operas of Mexico
Right.
because I was always hearing new things, little bits of gossip, and it was after a while it was a little overpowering, but it was quite an experience and an enjoyable one.
Why was writing Wheels Up important to you?
After we sold the bookstore and we're living there, well, I started to feel that the level of corruption was slowly beginning, even towards the Yucatan Peninsula. And I wanted to expose the level of corruption and how the cartels actually ran in many cases not only the government but the military and the federale police. And I wanted to expose how it has shaped and weakened the country, this influence of corruption and violence.
Right. So where did you get your ideas from?
Well, a lot of my ideas are grounded in personal experience, not just by reading through various publications and hearing people talk. You know, when you're living in a culture and you've been there for some time, you meet a lot of people and you hear a lot of different stories.
Mm.
But I also started to use newspapers as a jumping off spot because Mexican newspapers, some of them are quite very almost they're kind of gabby and kind of oh they expose a lot through photos as well. So since I read the papers, I would often see many things that were mind blowing actually,
Right.
and I decided that I could use this in writing fiction.
Right. So the newspapers were not so much fact, just hard fact. They were more human interest, as it were.
Well, they were actually, unfortunately, they were factual, but it would be more like a National Enquirer type thing. They
Ah,
would be more outrageous,
right.
and they also the back page was always a terrible display of the violence that had happened the week before. So
Okay.
it was kind of like if you came there as a tourist, none of this you would ever know.
Right.
But living there and running a business, I read the
Well,
newspapers.
they all say that visiting a place and living there are two totally separate experiences.
Truly.
They say all books of fiction have at least one pivotal point where the reader can't put the book down. Is that true of Wheels Up?
Well, I have been told by readers, yes, and I'll take you to the place. It's about a third of the way into the book. But what happens is during a stopover from Bogota, Colombia to Cancun, a drug deal that my main character Layla is involved in with a fellow dealer from Canada, a pot grower named Clayla Sal. She unexpectedly uncovers that their Guatemala capo is involved in a dirty secret, and she just uncovers this and she exposes it and she confronts him with it. And when that happens, it leads to total chaos, of course. And she, Clay LaSalle, her bodyguard, and the pilot have to get out of Guatemala in an early morning dawn escape. And because they can't refuel before they leave, they crash in a Yucatan jungle after they're denied landing rights in Cancun. And so after the plane crash, the survivors have to either trek out of the jungle or die. And that is when people told me they couldn't put the book down.
Not surprised. How hard is it to write a book like this? And I mean, do you have any tips to pass on that will make the journey easier for other writers?
Well, it took me 4 years to write the book, and I think that because I came from a nonfiction background, I originally just started doing research, and I researched for about a year. I read everything I could. I watched documentaries. There are many really excellent Mexican journalists and authors. I followed Annabelle Hernandez. She wrote an excellent book called Narcoland. there's another Mexican journalist named Lydia Cacho who exposed sex trafficking rings in Cancun. And then, unfortunately, Javier Valdez was one of the 140 journalists who was killed by the cartels because he wrote about the cartels. So basically, that was what gave me the impetus to write about the cartels. And also, I watched a lot of movies like Sicario, Savages by Don Winslow, and even I started watching old mafia movies too because the mafia is not unlike the cartel hierarchy.
I was just going to say that. It sounds very, very
Yeah,
similar.
it really is, and from what I've studied, and so there was also a really good one that was based on fact about Barry Seal, who was an operative for the U.S. government, and it was called American Made. But I watched these, and then of course Netflix is streaming a series for the last few years called Narcos,
Yeah.
and it began. I'm sure you've heard of that. It
Sure.
began in Colombia with Escobar, and then now it's in the fourth season and it's in Mexico. So that was my first year. And then after that, I started to write fiction, and what I use that to write the story. And new writers tend to overwrite, so I got an editor about my third year in, and then she helped me kind of make sure that everything moved forward in an orderly fashion. And she also had me cut about 20,000 words. So it became a trimmed down version, 70,000 words still, which is about the average for a thriller. So I would suggest to anyone who's a writer to definitely get an editor.
And also research and immerse yourself in the subject.
Exactly.
So what other books are you working on, and when will they be published?
Wheels Up is actually a trilogy, and this the first one deals with, of course, Layla and how she is immersed into the narco culture. The second book I'm working on, about 2/3 of the way through, is called Layla's Law, and I hope to have that finished the end of this year. And then the third one will be titled Layla's Revenge. So it is a trilogy.
What's one fact about the book that would surprise people?
I think people would be surprised to realize that a lot of the prompts that I used were actually pulled from today's news or the newspapers, and that is what gave my mind kind of the imaginary idea of how to use it. And actually, this is more or less it's a new genre. It's called narco noir, and people like Don Winslow, who worked in the DEA in the United States in San Diego. He has written like The Cartel, Power of the Dog, Savages, and he's very well known. And there are many other, like Queen of the South was written by Arturo Perez, and that is also based more or less on fact. And so I'm using these as prompts basically, and that's kind of probably what would surprise people because I really look at it more like historical fiction.
Yes, yeah, it definitely sounds like that. Lastly, what message are you trying to get across in your book, Jeanine?
Well, I love Mexico dearly, and it's this really beautiful and complex country. And the people are very determined people, and they press on in spite of any type of problems that might exist. And I feel so bad about the corruption and the violence that is creeping in and it affects the daily life of so many people there.
Of course.
And I wanted to expose that the strife that's happening, even if people are not involved in the drug trade, even if they're just an average person living a regular life, by accident they can get pulled in, or they can be in the crossfire of two cartels that are fighting, or a son or daughter, mostly a son, excuse me, could be co-opted into working for them. So it's like even the average person seems not to be able to escape it, and it's really painful to know that. And the narco culture is just it's overpowering, and I think just by being there, the average citizen is affected by it because the corruption, it often goes, as mentioned, to the police or to the government, And so only 1% of crimes in Mexico is actually reported and looked at. People are they're afraid to come forward now. So the beginning of my book, I have a quotation, and it's from Napoleon Bonaparte.
Mm.
And that quotation is, "Geography is destiny." And I truly believe, after having lived in Mexico, that for the people who are citizens of Mexico, their geography is their destiny, because they cannot escape at this time the level of corruption and violence that is pervasive there.
Where can people find Wheels Up?
On Amazon.com, it's available on paperback and ebook, and it's also on Kobo.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you, Jeanine. Please come back on book. Sorry, please come back on Book Talk Radio Club when you publish your next book. I'd love to chat with you and hear more. In the meantime, good luck for the future, and thank you everyone for listening to Book Talk Radio Club. Thank you very much, Jeanine.
Thank you so much for the interview, Claire. I really enjoyed talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.